Now they can cozy up, Iris.
I know. Snug up. Hold on there. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Come along.
Oh, I had to make an entrance.
There you go.
All right, hi. We're going to tell the Archie Lee story here. Archie Lee was a slave from Mississippi. Is that volume okay there? Is it too loud or?
No, it's
Too loud, okay.
Then back up. No.
All right. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Is that better? Am I not yelling at you? No? Okay. Archie Lee was a slave from Mississippi who came here with his master, a sickly young man named Charles Stovall, arriving in Sacramento in October 1857. Being short of money, Stovall sold Archie's labor to locals for nearly a month, Archie receiving most of the wages. To support himself, Stovall opened a private school, which he taught for 2 months. During the time his services were for hire, Archie became acquainted with free blacks in the colored convention movement, and after 18 months, when Stovall wanted to send Archie back to Mississippi, Archie decided he didn't want to go back.
Archie hid out in the Hackett House, a black-owned boarding house on 3rd Street between K and L Streets, where he was arrested. One of the owners went 2 blocks down the street to lawyer Edwin Crocker's offices. He went because the well-known Crocker had already worked on behalf of fugitive slaves in Indiana and Sacramento. Crocker immediately issued a writ of habeas corpus for Archie. The trial took place in County Judge Robert Robinson's courtroom, and he is buried in the OCC as well. Stovall's lawyers claimed that since Archie himself did not ask for a writ to gain his freedom,
He might not be interested in it. Judge Robinson took a moment to ask Archie if he really wanted to be set free, but afraid of giving a wrong answer, Archie remained silent. And you pointed out that Archie was only 15 years old.
Archie was only 15 years old when all this was going on.
Not confident in Judge Robinson's loyalties, Stovall's attorneys took a new approach and involved the United States Commissioner, a type of federal judge. He was George Penn Johnston, a Southerner, but Johnston ruled that he did not have jurisdiction in the case. Archie had not crossed state lines in running away from Stovall. Johnston's decision kicked the case back to Robinson's court, where Stovall's lawyers repeated the claim that Archie himself had nothing to do with the matter of his freedom. It was these outside agitators that were responsible. Judge Robinson again asked Archie if he really wanted his freedom. This time Archie found his tongue and said, "I don't understand what you were speaking of, but I want it to come out right. I don't want to go back to Mississippi."
Archie's lawyers felt confident that Stovall's renting out of Archie's services and his opening of a school were certainly not the actions of a traveler. Robinson ordered Archie to go free. The words were hardly uttered when Archie was rearrested. Stovall's lawyers had communicated with Justice David T.S. Terry of the California Supreme Court, a good old Southern boy, and he used his special powers to issue a writ requiring that the case be brought before the Supreme Court. Many of the stunned spectators walked with Archie as he was led back to jail. At this time, the Supreme Court was a 3-man court composed of Terry, a violent bully who would later kill Senator David Broderick in a scandalous duel, Peter Burnett, California's first governor, and another justice. As a legislator in Oregon, Burnett had advocated flogging blacks that did not leave the state, and as California's governor, did not want either slaves or free blacks in the state. The third member was a more moderate Stephen Field, but he was ill during the case and was not present. Burnett's written opinion shocked and dismayed many. On all major points, Burnett agreed that Stovall did not fit the definition of a traveler. But, since Stovall was a young and inexperienced man, had been ill, and this was the first time that the court had faced such a case, the court would show kindness to Stovall and give him back his property. He stated, "It is our policy and duty not to clog the privilege of visiting us with unnecessary restrictions."
Like not being able to bring your slaves.
Yeah.
The crowd erupted in angry confusion, the police escorting Archie through the streets about 10 blocks, followed by the crowd, split between Stovall and Archie supporters. The feeling was widespread that the judges had surrendered the dignity of the court to appease prejudice. Archie was taken by Stovall, and rumors soon abounded that he was to be snuck aboard a vessel in San Francisco Bay and then back to Mississippi. Black patrols soon were noted on the wharves of San Francisco, along with the police who had a writ of habeas corpus for Archie. The community watched the wars intently as unsympathetic jokesters tried to send their patrols after decoys. During this time, black businesses closed their doors to help. They also had a great intelligence network, as many black leaders worked as stewards, cooks, waiters, deckhands on ships, and barbers. Anywhere people talked, they were listening. Anybody checking into a hotel, getting a meal, getting off a boat was observed by them. A tiny rowboat went to meet a ship as it left the bay. Archie was aboard. The police were waiting on board the ship and took custody of him, and he was rowed to shore to the cheers and probably a few jeers of an immense crowd. The silent Archie watched everything intently, but remarked that there was no need for him to say anything because white folks was doing enough talking for everybody.
Back in county court, Archie's lawyers argued that the Supreme Court was only an appeals court, and since the case was not brought to the justices as an appeal, their decision did carry the authority of a higher court. Archie was freed. As he was preparing to join his companions, a U.S. Marshal walked up to him and placed him under arrest. Angry voices filled the courtroom, and one of them was Archie's. He shouted that he would never be taken back to slavery. He would die first. He was hustled out of the packed courtroom, and the bedlam followed him into the streets. He had to be taken to the office of the U.S. Commissioner about 10 blocks away, and the throng that followed him numbered about 600 people. The din was deafening. Some pro-slavery whites formed a cordon around Archie and the officers to help push the reluctant Archie through the streets. U.S. Commissioner Johnston, who thought he'd gotten rid of this case, must have been puzzled when Stovall's lawyers brought him an affidavit compelling him to arrest Archie as a runaway slave. He had already concluded 9 weeks earlier that Archie was not a fugitive.
Stovall's lawyers knew that Johnston was a member of the pro-slavery wing of the Democratic Party and expected sympathetic treatment at his hands, but they didn't know him very well, and he didn't let his personal prejudices blind him to the evidence. At one point during the trial, tempers flared and Johnston had to leave the bench to break up a fight between the two lawyers, one of whom carried an ill-concealed pistol. Can you imagine being on trial for your life and the guy that's trying to send you away has got a pistol right here? Crazy. Many spectators were disappointed that no bloodshed resulted. Johnston's decision stated that the Supreme Court had never decided the question of Archie Lee and in fact did not have the power to do so, and that Johnston could only deal with the case if it were a genuine fugitive slave case. Running away within the boundaries of California did not make him a fugitive slave, as he had already said months ago, guys, already. Archie was a free man. Johnston immediately became a pariah to his own political party, or own wing of the political party, and was challenged to a duel by one of them, and would later fight a duel with another state senator who is buried here as a result of that duel. Hundreds gathered. Yes, detail. Hundreds gathered at the jailhouse for Archie's release. Everyone wanted to shake his hand and congratulate him. Archie was spirited away before anybody could try any further legal maneuvering. Archie went to Victoria, British Columbia, to work the new gold rush there, and returning after the Civil War started, worked as a barber in Washoe, Nevada, dying in 1873 as a free man. Yeah, the Archie Lee crazy story, and that was the easy version.
The story is actually more of a tale of fashion than it is of personal. As was true of all social class groups, free African Americans dressed in such a way that their appearance blended in, rather than stood apart from, the people and groups with whom they interacted. Slaves, however, typically wore simple clothing of coarse cloth. So traditional was this fabric, produced largely in the North for slave clothing, that it was awfully sold simply as Negro cloth.
Can you turn it up your mic a little bit?
Sure, sorry. Echo from this thing is like freaking me out.
Okay.
Let's do that's down. There we go. How's that? Is that better? Awesome. You want me to start over? Okay. As was true of all social class groups, free African Americans dressed in such a way that they had their appearance blended in with, and rather than stood apart from, the people and groups with whom they interacted. Slaves, however, did not have a choice and typically wore simple clothing from coarse cloth. So traditional was the fabric produced largely in the North for slave clothing that it was awfully sold simply as Negro cloth. Other names for this coarse but durable cloth were Osnaburg, sheeting, and Lowell cloth. The cut of slave clothing was simple. Box-like cuts for sleeves, bodices, and skirts were often found. The clothing was intended to be functional and durable and to preclude individual expression. Clothing and appearance was one of the slave owners' important tools for demoralizing and oppressing the slave population. Proper fit, therefore, was not emphasized, and most clothing was made in very crude sizes. Rope belts or other ties were sometimes used to make the outfits fit better. Many African American women adopted a headdress that was unique compared to any other group of women during this time period. These wrapped cloth headdresses, occasionally made from the same fabric as the dress, was the universal style worn by slave women, and it continued to be worn for some time after emancipation. What fabric or combination of fabrics a woman used to wrap her fashion dress was the style, and the style in which she wrapped the fabric around her head were both her choice. That was an example of the resourcefulness and imagination of those African American women, taking something meant to enforce uniformity and transforming it into something uniquely expressive, while only having standard issue fabric to work with. Many plantation households handed down clothing from the white family members to servants most closely connected to the household work, but they wore them in ways totally incomprehensible to their owners. A fancy dress worn with bare feet, a silk dress lengthened with patchwork panels of various cotton and linen fabrics, dresses mended with a rainbow of patchwork pieces. All of these were the ways that the African American population displayed their unique aesthetic. The result was a mixture of styles, colors, and fabrics that the white Southerners found unsettling and at times offensive.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I love how they took something that was meant to be like a uniform and made it their own, you know? That's great.
A little rebellion against the masses.
He had to select leaders among their class. He was selected as the second officer by his group. And they had terrible times. They basically, he says, he wrote a diary of his experiences, and he says basically that the Tuskegee experiment was designed to prove that blacks could not fly airplanes. And it was a resounding failure and produced some of the best pilots and ground personnel. So their quarters were in tar paper shacks that were basically on the runway, right next to the tarmac. So you could hear everything, a terrible place to try and sleep or learn anything. They were segregated where they went on the base, and in the mess hall too, they had to sit in the corner. He actually went to several different training bases because he qualified for the different programs. So at one of them, they had their own mess hall, and the two black cooks made sure that they had the best food on the base, and all their meals were cooked to order, restaurant style. Some of the white officers heard about the good food and started coming over, and they would eat with them. When they arrived at San Angelo, Texas for bombardier training, they were housed in 9 small single-story tar paper covered buildings next to the flight line and runways. This was the least desirable place for housing on the base, obviously. They were separated in the mess hall also. And at one point, when their training was almost over, they sent they sent a letter to the Inspector General of the Army and said they were displeased with the treatment they were getting and they were requesting an immediate honorable discharge. They were aware that Army had spent $20,000 on each of these guys and they weren't going to jeopardize that. So somebody would be held accountable for that. And the lights out were at 9, so they had to sign the letter after 9 by flashlight. They sent the letter, and the very next day, some big muckety-muck from headquarters came down there and settled it and said, you guys can now eat wherever you want to. But, let's see, and they were actually, after they became officers, they were not allowed to eat at the officers' club on the base. So there were several officers that had jeopardized their career by having a fight over being let into the officers' club, and he decided not to do that. Then the war started winding down. He became, after he got his license or whatever for the Bombardier, they didn't have anything for him to do because the war was over, so he requested a discharge. And at that point, there were no black pilots in the U.S. There was nowhere for them to go. They weren't going to let them fly in the Army. No civilian airlines were going to hire them. A few of them went to Canada and got jobs, but they had to wait another generation for that to happen. So, anyway, Robert Lee Olivier is buried right out there, and he was a genuine Tuskegee Airman. Any questions about that?
Do you know how he died?
Well, he died of natural causes. He died about 3 years ago.
Was he the last one?
The last Tuskegee, there's a couple more. Yeah.
I know the last one died.
Yeah. So, all right, let's wander.
Was a railroad road engineer, hence the train. And on the evening of September 26, 1880, he was taking a weary group of soldiers from the 1st Regiment back to the bay after spending the day at the State Fair in Sacramento. As the train pulled into the end of the filling station on the Oakland Wharf, the train was about to jump track due to a misplaced switch, and Brown pulled the newfangled air brake. The train stopped so suddenly that passengers were thrown forward from their seats. The engine containing Brown turned a somersault and went into the bay, killing Brown. The first car after the engine went partly over, and the other cars remained securely on the track. Brown saw that the switch was misplaced and had time, and the presence of mind, to put on the air brake and slow the train down, or else the accident would have been much, much worse. There were bumps and bruises aplenty, and a fireman had to be fished out of the water, but Brown's quick thinking and willingness to sacrifice his own life ensured that no one else lost theirs that day. A passenger later quoted this first-hand account of the event. In the first car, the confusion was great and indescribable. The sound of hissing steam and the crashing of timbers simultaneously with a sudden lurch, which piled men together promiscuously in the forward end of the car, produced a panic. Men swore and screamed, and in their haste to escape from the car, which had toppled forward, broke through the windows on the left-hand side and jumped out. The men of the 1st Regiment soon mobilized to find survivors, but could not find Brown. He was found under the locomotive the next day. Brown left behind his mother and a sister. The funeral, starting from their home, was very largely attended. The entire regiment wanted to come to the services, but were not able to make it. A detachment of 20 men with a lieutenant were sent and served as an escort for the body and fired a military salute of honor over the grave. The men came up with this statement: Resolved, that in the act of Engineer William Brown we recognize a brave devotion to duty, a rare presence of mind, a true heroism, a tender regard for others, and a disregard for self, when in the balance against duty, worthy of the emulation of all men, and that we most sincerely mourn the loss of one who has shown himself by deed to be a true man, and regret that the mysterious ways of Providence required that he should be sacrificed upon the altar of his devotion to his duties. But though he be dead, yet his example is before us as an incentive to be true to our stations in life.
This is the Johnson family plot. Right over here is Cornelius Peck. He was a black officer in the Civil War. It says he was a mulatto. So he was probably in charge of a black regiment, since they wouldn't have put him in charge of a white regiment. We don't really know very many details about him other than that he existed. Over here is Ernest Johnson. He is the son of Beverly Johnson, who we met earlier. And Beverly Johnson was he was active in the colored convention movement. And his daughter had tried to get into the public school. They had tried to get Ernest into Stanford. He was a good student. Ernest was their son. Stanford University was just starting that year, and they got rejected. Now Beverly Johnson had worked for the railroads, done catering for the railroad, so he knew the Stanford family. He went to Mrs. Stanford personally and said, "I want my son to go to Stanford." And she was from New England, an abolitionist family, and so she got Ernest into Stanford, and he was in the first class at Stanford. Very light-skinned. If you look at the photographs, people did not know that they had a black alumni until 100 years later. They found out. Ernest Johnson got his diploma from Stanford. He died of tuberculosis at an early age, I think 27. And he's buried here with his diploma from Stanford.
Wow.
And our next stop is right over here. You can get out of the grass if you want to. And right over here is the Gwynn family plot with the Weeping Willow on it. A prime location right next to the bus stop. And Gwynn is on the flyer. He's the gentleman in the Civil War uniform. That's William Gwynn. And he is buried right here. He came to California in 1865 and opened up a barber shop, and which didn't go out of business for about 45 years. And they went from being a black-dominated industry to the turn of the century when they were pushed out of the industry. And there were only three black-owned barbershops in 1900. And they tried to push, actually by the time he died in 1906, I believe, he was the last remaining black barber shop in town. And they tried to push him out of business by making him go union. And he didn't want to go union because his barbers were already happy with his wages. If you join the union, he had been in the union for a while, and then when the black barbers got fired from the shop, they didn't do anything for them. So they're like, well, why are we going to pay our money to you if you're not going to do anything for us? So he died, and the shop closed, and his daughter Mary had to quit school, and the family started a shop called Gwynn's Tamales. Tamales and beans that was really big at that point. So they had a little stand selling tamales and beans. And one guy, Bert Robinson, would come by. We don't have the Gwynn family here today, do we? Okay, they're still in town and they come by here sometimes. So I don't. If they were here, I would let them tell the story. But Bert Robinson is on the flyer also. He's one of the two gents in the suits, the dapper guys up front. And he came in and ate a bowl of beans every day until, he sold her on himself, and they were eventually married. And he could stop eating beans. So they got married. Mary Gwynn became Mary Robinson, Mary Bert Robinson, and he eventually became a garbage man. In 1923, the city of Sacramento ended its contract, had a contract dispute with its garbage provider. They had a company, a private company, and they made it a municipal job. And they opened it up to everybody, and they opened it up to black people, and they hired a bunch of black garbage men, and that was the first municipal job that black people were allowed to get in Sacramento, and it paid very well for the time period, and it was a foot in the door, you know, for a lot of folks. So we have one more stop. We're going to go up the hill and back towards the entrance, and we have one more stop, and that will be the end of our tour. Did you have any more questions? Anybody? Go ahead, I know you do.
Give her a minute.
No, I was just wondering if this happened due to this tree.
Oh, yeah. You see a lot of these things like this where maybe a tree was planted 100 years ago when the person died, and then eventually it's kind of taken over and pushed things out of the way, and that is what happens. And they also settle too. The ground settles, the construction might crack, and things might sink.
California is prone to earthquake.
Yeah. And a lot of the people had headstones at one point, but sometimes they sink below the ground, or broken off, vandalized.
So what's the hole over here?
Maybe a skunk, probably a skunk. But they don't come out this time of day, so you're probably okay.
Now, will they have to repair this eventually, or no? Do they just let it?
Depends. Yeah, depends if they can afford it.
Oh, okay.
And if it's a hazard, you know, then maybe they'll rope it off or something.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Oh, jeez. This is gonna burst my ears. Get closer, Yanni. Pull it. Pull it. I'll pull you.
Go ahead and just give it a nice tug.
Give it a good yank. Give it a good
Nope.
pull.
Daddy.
Not yet.
Pull it. No, you're stronger. Man. Pull it till it hits.
If you grip inside the little hole, those two little holes down there, you might get a better grip. See what I'm talking about?
Pull it all the way forward. Pull it all the way. There you go.
You want to do it?
Let's start his quick stuff.
Yeah. Give it a good yank.
Say goodbye.
Okay, so you do it in one.
Yeah, this was in a fire station.
Ouch.
That's the bell they'd actually ring.
They ring a
Nice,
bell when
yeah.
there's a fire.
Plug my ears. But I can't plug my ears. Okay, just plug my ears. Have Donnie plug your ears and I'll plug my ears. Okay.
Yep, that was her. So that's not
Let's plug them here.
because no one wants to live there. Well, it's been sold several
Oh!
Got a double one on that one.